do want to remind everybody, you know, this is an important meeting. There's a lot of data here. There's a lot of information here. And so what I want to make sure that folks know is that the microphones will be very important. We have a tendency to take them away from our mouth and nobody can hear, right? So let's just make sure we keep the microphones close to our mouth. I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is, while it's combined with a board meeting, tonight's meeting is really focused around the budget for 2023. There won't be much board business being done tonight other than making sure that we understand the budget. So I'll start off by asking Madam Secretary if she has anything to say.
Yeah, as always, if you have not done already, as Brian said, this is a very important meeting. We would really like as few distractions as we could have, if any. So if you would just please silence your phone right now. I know some people forget. So if you'll try to silent it now, then they'll help wake you up. Thank you.
All right, so I'll just start with a motion to approve the October minutes. Any seconds on that? The board meeting minutes from second? Okay, we got a second from Reed. All those in favor? Aye? Okay. All right, so we're done with that. Okay. So I sort of want to just make sure everybody understands what this meeting is going to be. Rita's going to take us through the budget in detail. What I want to make sure everybody knows is that this is laid out in 3 parts. All right, the first part is going to be just the operating budget. Okay, it's the HOA dues and the budget to run the building. That's it. That's what it is. We're going to move that into what we think, what we believe is the things that the building needs from a capital perspective. We're going to talk a lot more about that and what that means later on. With respect to the HOA, what you're going to be asked to do in the annual meeting is to approve or reject it. Okay? The board has approved it. The finance committee has made a recommendation. We've gotten together several times. We looked through a lot of data. The finance committee recommended a budget, and the board unanimously approved that budget. So that's the budget, okay? Your job as owners is to accept or reject that budget. The second thing that we're going to be asking for your consent to do, which requires 2/3 of the owners to consent to, is going to be a declaration about an initiation fee. Okay, that declaration, everybody has to determine whether or not it's the right thing for them or not. And if they believe, if we do a good enough job of saying why we need something like that, we as a board have unanimously agreed to put that in front of this group to consent to. The third thing is something relatively new we weren't planning on, but it happened. It happened because of something that came up at one of the Meet the Candidate meeting. It has to do with compensation for the resident board members. Okay, so you're going to see a bylaw change that provides compensation, a minimal compensation in the form of a credit to resident board members. You're being asked to approve that or not approve that. So those are the 3 things that are going on in the annual meeting. Okay, is everybody good on that? Okay, so a couple of things, a couple of other things that I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew. We looked at a lot of different things, and in looking at those things, you know, there were a couple of, I'm going to call them guardrails that were important to the finance committee. There was one, we made a commitment last year, right? We looked at a 5-year plan. And we thought that the increase that we should be anticipating was about 5 percent this year, right? So that was in the package last year. We also, are concerned about the burden that something like that presents to people, okay? Because it's a burden. But in addition to that, what we know has also happened that we didn't know is that inflation, right? If you look at the last 12 months, based on the October reports, inflation was 7.7%, right? So we had that impact from inflation. And further to that, we know that the COLA, the increase that the government has approved for the homeowners for Social Security is about 8.7% next year, right? So those were sort of backdrop to a decision that we made, which is in your package, and you already know it, which is the recommendation that the Finance Committee made was a 5.5% increase. We're gonna go through that in detail. As opposed to trying to push the envelope on things that we didn't think were gonna be affordable. So that's important. Lastly, and I wanna make sure I say this, right, whatever. Lastly, it's just important for you guys to know that while we put out a message to everybody that said, we want questions in writing before the meeting, it doesn't mean that we're not gonna take questions either during the meeting or after the meeting that aren't written in advance. The purpose of writing those questions in advance is because we want everybody to be heard. Anybody with a question should be allowed to be heard. Sometimes there are folks that dominate the conversation. And unless other people have an opportunity to have their question in, sometimes that question doesn't get answered. So again, we're not gonna not have questions asked, and we'll take those questions so long as they pertain to the budget, and we'll answer those questions as best we can. Okay, but the reason for putting them in writing in advance is so that everybody has an opportunity. So with that, I am going to turn the budget meeting over to our executive director, Rita Moore.
Can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me? I sounded louder. Hello? Okay. Everybody in the back? There we go. Okay, well, good evening. Somehow our mic stand got broken off of our podium, so I'm going to have to hold the microphone. I'm sure everyone knows me, but again, like Brian said, I'm Rita Malone, the Executive Director, and we'll go right into it. I feel like I can't hear myself. Anyway, so the following presentation is an informational and contains recommendations being made to the association. Management and the board feels this presentation is crucial to the owners so you can make an informed decision when it comes time to vote at the annual meeting. It is important to know that recommendations being made to the association will not change as a result of this meeting. The Finance Committee, which consisted of Bill Thaxton, not sure if he's here, Scott Goins, the board and myself, worked through this plan and feel we are on the right path to reach our goals in which we started laying out in the 2021 annual meeting for 2022 and beyond. The parts to this presentation are our guiding principles, how we spent your dues in 2022, what we are trying to achieve in 2023, our FY22 forecast and our FY23 spending assumptions, how our operating budget and capital relate to each other, the budget recommendation being made by the board, our capital plan consideration, the bylaw amendment that Brian mentioned, as well as the declaration change. If you're following along in the packet that you received, we are going to begin on page 2. As the committee started the process this year, we wanted to focus on our financial goals and getting to the marker in which we wanted to be. We all understand the challenges in the last 12 months with inflation, and while we don't have a magic wand, we foresee a more steady stream in 23. As stated in 21, our goal is to cover our HOA expenses and fund the reserves with our HOA dues while continuing to improve every amenity wanted by most owners and residents, including dining, activities, fitness, and our new improved personal care center. We also need to focus on other sources of income, such as the initiation fee, which Scott Carrier will talk about later in the presentation. We also have to continue to better manage costs so that we can have a more robust reserve to improve the crucial areas in the building as well as the physical amenities. As we continue to monitor the economic indicators, a more robust reserve allows us to better sourcing options for capital improvements. As I note, the 10-year T-bill, which sets the benchmark for borrowing, is currently 4% versus around 2% a year ago. We also planned for a 5.4% CPI and got 7.7, which was higher at times in the last 12 months. We've done well in some areas, such as funding the operational expenses with our HOA dues, although we didn't quite get there all the way because we also wanted it to fund our reserve deposit. It went a long way. If you recall, in 2021, we stated that was our goal by 2024. We did better controlling costs in departments such as resident accountability and water-related damage, which allowed us to recover cost. Because of the revitalization in our personal care center, we were able to increase our revenue by $624,000. And last but not least, we have begun a master planning for our 36-year-old building. Now, I know that may raise many eyebrows, but the way I look at it is how can we take a 36-year-old facility and focus on lifestyles such as the internet, more convenience, and the quality of life by continuing to place a Band-Aid and act as if we're experts in every field. We simply can't. To me, a master plan doesn't mean that we're going to go paint the building black, white, purple, green. It means that we are making connections between the buildings, the social settings, and the surrounding environment. No matter how well we've done in some areas, there's always areas that we may need improvement in. We were not able to manage the food industry spiraling costs, such as labor, and the need to secure consistent staff, which would have enabled us to utilize the point-of-sale system in the dining room to allow for a more efficient service. Another big hit was utilities. We budgeted for a 5% increase, but thus far have been hit with a 21% increase. We will slightly go into how we are actually billed for this later in the presentation. Another big hit is the fact that our website was not the tool that we anticipated on it being. It continues to be a work in progress. I, like many of you and your relatives, would like the website to be more robust and being able to be used for placing work orders, placing food orders to the dining room, placing housekeeping orders so that we may be more efficient. And last but not least, we were not able to execute on any capital improvements, but are looking forward to the capital presentation in the first quarter of 2023. Moving to page 3. So where do we spend your dues? In 2022, 40.6% of the dues went to food, beverage, and service, which includes wages and supplies for dining and celebrations. We'll come back to this topic when we get to the forecast and spending assumption. 16% is paid out on maintenance, utilities, and housekeeping. 4.1% is allocated to activities, events, and transportation. 29.6% is spent on administration of MBT business, front desk, billing, and accounting. 9.4% is devoted to keeping our PCC available and operational. So page 4, we laid out our foundation and our guiding principles. What is it that we're trying to achieve in 2023? We're trying to ensure that we increase our capital reserves, better manage cost and quality in the dining room. Although I believe our cost expectations may not be realistic, we still expect great quality and consistent service. Again, I can't say this enough, but we should aim to cover our operating expenses and our capital reserve deposits and have a month of buffer with our HOA dues. We need to better brand and market and have a more mobile-friendly website to be more efficient in utilizing the tools that I mentioned earlier. And number 5, to boost professional fees to support long-term planning. Now on to the big one, page 5. Our FY22 forecast and spending assumptions in 23. As you can see, our overall cost we anticipate to increase by 3%. So let's break it down a bit. Employee expenses non-dining. The contract labor line item. We began utilizing contract labor in the personal care center as the census in that department started to increase after our revitalization. We also use contract labor in other areas such as maintenance and housekeeping, but mostly PCC. These costs have previously been in the total employee cost, but I have broken them out for visual purposes. These employees are contracted with us at a rate that is not a temporary rate, and it is for a specific period. It is renewable if we wish to do so. And it also gives us the luxury of having the same staff members reporting every day, whereas temporary labor does not. I know the key for this in the personal care center is it's nice to always see the same staff. It's nice to always see the same residents. But you know what? One day we found ourselves not having any residents in the personal care center. So therefore, we were in a position to lay off employees. And then when the revitalization process started in November of 2021, we were in a position to bring back employees. And while the workforce labor was down, we turned to the contract labor, which has worked out very well for us. In the event this would happen again, we would simply let the contract labor go for other contract work they may have. In saying all that, the contract labor allows us to be more flexible at a very good rate for us. The increase of $56,000 in employee expenses is a small cost of living increase and includes one additional employee in administration. Moving on to administrative expenses. We anticipated insurance increase as we do every year, although not as large as the last couple of years because we've not had any claims in 2022. By the way, this is the first year in 5 years we have not had any insurance claims. Everybody knock on wood.
Whoa.
The increase in professional service is to cover things like marketing, including the website, consultants such as those that we are using for the internet, architects if needed, and so forth, with the overall increase in admin expenses increasing by $42,000. Utilities, I mentioned earlier, we are roughly 21% over budget for electricity, as we don't see that changing, so the line item for that has been adjusted accordingly. Several of our retired CPAs have asked why do we not negotiate a contract with Georgia Power? So I started investigating it. And our electric bill is split into 2 bills. We get one bill for the service center, which covers everything from the front door all the way back to the sun porch. The second bill covers everything in building A and B, which is the condos and the common areas. The large increase that we've been facing in the bill is the one that covers the condos and the common areas and building A and B. And speaking with the business department recently, our year runs from April to March. During that year, Georgia Power takes the highest 30-minute peak and bases our kilowatt hours off of that highest 30-minute peak for the next year. It also determines our demand rate off that number. And due to the number of kilowatt hours we use, we're automatically dumped into a commercial rate. I can tell you that our highest rate in 2021 to 2022 increased by 540 kilowatts. That means that our rate in 2021 was being based off of 460 kilowatts. In 2022, our highest 30-minute period peak was 1,000 kilowatts. After much consideration of the information that the Georgia Power representative provided me, I'm still not really satisfied and seeking further counsel from a business representative in that field. With that being said, that is why our utility rate is increasing by $55,000. Maintenance and housekeeping. Over the last week, I've had a few questions about what a Vertipack is, why it fluctuates from year to year from those of you that have been here a while. The Vertipack is the heating and cooling unit that is in your condo. In 2018 and 19, we ordered 75 units for those 2 years, which costed us $102,000. We sent a maintenance employee to HVAC school so he could repair the units as needed, and we were able to cut down on the amount we were ordering each year. In 2020 and 2021, we only ordered 20 units at a total of $31,000, which saved us $71,000. In 2022, we ordered 15 units, but now we are seeing a lot of the older units less repairable, so therefore that is why we are budgeting for 25 units in 2022, and you see that variance. On to repairs. Many of you should recall the line item that we've always called unplanned and extraordinary, and the exorbitant amount of expenses dumped into that category each year. The reality is if it occurs each year, it's really not unplanned, right? And so in 2021, we accepted the fact that these issues are going to happen and should be budgeted rather than unplanned. And so we increased our repairs category to cover such items. And you'll see that we narrowed the gap from the previous year of $400,000 in that category to $39,000. And so in 2023, we again increased our repairs category to cover these items, as well as items that we know are going to hit next year, such as our boiler service repair, replacing more valves, our switchgear maintenance in the electrical room, and resurfacing the main driveway and circle as we do every 5 to 6 years. So that is why our increase in maintenance is $72,000. Last but not least, our dining services. As this is a complex topic, there's a lot of variables at play in this section. Before I start this section, I want to say this conversation is about the budget and what's driving the financials. The issue of whether or not we have the right vendor in food service or we are going in the right direction is not a conversation to be brought up today, but in the future at a board meeting or at an annual meeting if you as an owner wish to do so. In saying that, everyone knows that our food cost has been rising in Georgia alone. If you look at Sandy Springs, the cost for our area is above the national average for food away from home. The national average is 8.6. Okay, well, Sandy Springs is 12.7. We've had extreme pressures on the cost of food over the last year, but the biggest pressure for us has been in wages. Wages have gone up 8.4% in the last year. If you also look at the amount of employees available pre-pandemic, the month before Mount Vernon Towers shut down, the average number of employees available was 507,000. It got as low as 285,000. When we opened the dining room back up in March of 2021, the hospitality workforce was down 15% in Georgia. We've had to pay the gap by using temporary labor because there wasn't enough people in the workforce. But there is hope. In September, we see it reaching a more pre-pandemic peak, which provides us relief from the temporary labor companies that have gouged us for a year. This is important because it eliminates all the excuses. No more excuses that we can have. We should be able to be fully staffed, be able to train and maintain the level of service and consistency that we all desire as diners, no matter where we go. And utilize and learn the point of sale system to be more efficient with order taking and the execution of meals at the expedition line, which at the end of the day will create a better experience for everyone. So how does all this relate to the budget? Well, the great thing is we see a turnaround. Of course, our expectations will increase for our current food service vendor, maybe not overnight, but for sure gradually. And I believe this. I believe the economics are right in this budget. We are betting on food costs not continuing to rise. The inflation rate of 12.7% in Sandy Springs is all of last year. It's not saying it's going to be all of next year. And looking at the economics, it does not feel that next year we'll have the same circumstances to support that kind of inflation again. Also, as an alternative to increasing the cost and dues even more, we felt it appropriate to increase the meal prices to cover the gap for the total cost of putting a meal on the table. And by the way, breakfast and lunch meal rates here have not increased since 2017, and dinner prices here have not increased since 2020. And it's definitely more expensive today than it was in 17 and 20. Like I said, the workforce has increased, and that is why it has reduced our temporary labor line item. And although it has increased our compensation line item, it is still an extreme savings when compared. The cost of labor for Morrison's is down 14% in the third quarter versus the second quarter, and is at its lowest after finishing the first month of the fourth quarter. Food costs have remained steady, and we don't expect them to rise beyond what we've already seen. And so, after taking all the data and analyzing it, we feel that the overall decrease in the dining budget of $84,000 is appropriate for 2023. So back to where did your dues go in 2022? Yes, dining was 40.6% in 22. We're looking at 35% in 23. And coming up with the dining budget, we used data, analyzed it, looked at the run rate, and felt it more appropriate to budget accordingly, considering that. All that's left at the end of the day in the formula is that a good meal is provided and service is executed. That was a lot of information, but I felt that it was important to expand in that area because that is the biggest area that consumes your HOA dues. So our total operating expenses in 2022 was $4,695,000, and the assumption for 23 is $4,836,000. So in the end, we fully expect expenses to increase by 3%. Moving on to page 6. The Finance Committee reviewed several options for the 2023 operational and capital needs. We looked at everything. When the committee first began brainstorming, we wanted to determine what it was going to take to cover our HOA dues, to cover our operating expenses with our HOA dues and our reserve deposits. We looked at options that included increases as high as 14.8%, 12.9%, and everything in between. And without a doubt, the committee agreed that although we wanted to reach our goal in 23, that we would stick to what we said we would reach it in, which was 24, because those type of increases were way too much to consider. We then looked at the recommendation on what the budget was and what we have out there in capital to deal with in terms of spending. Spending for our capital projects comes from the reserves, either by way of transfer from reserves to operating to write a check, or by using it to secure other financing options. So in looking at the options, we said, okay, where will we be if we do nothing? Where will we be if we just do the 3% expected to increase the operating expenses? The committee hemmed and hawed, probably for 2 hours, about what the number should be, what the number could be, what was affordable, what was the right message, and that range came in between 4.5% and 8.7%, which was the inflation rate at the time. The committee voted on the more affordable number, which is the 5.5%, which will get us halfway to our goal. So let's break down what we're seeing here on page 6. In 2021, our operating expense was $4,712,000. In 2022, it was $4,695,000. In 23, we expect to spend $4,836,000. If we go with option 1 and did nothing, or if we go with option 2 and only cover the 3% needed, we wouldn't have anything left over from the HOA dues to deposit to the capital reserves. Now remember, the board approved earlier this year to increase the reserves from $15,000 a month to $20,000 a month, which is $240,000 a year. Going into option 3, which is the 5.5% increase, we automatically cover operating expenses and deposit $124,000 in the reserves from our dues, which is halfway to our commitment of $240,000. It does not get us where we want to be, which was set out to fund the operating expenses and our capital reserves, but it gets us closer to the 2024 goal, which we said that's where we wanted to be last year. So what happens with the other income that we generate? Other income invests in capital improvements and capital needs. It's basically money held in the reserves until it's spent. How do we generate other income? It's generated from operations such as administrative income, extra meals and dining, parties that we might have enough charge, our personal care center, and our maintenance work orders. In 2021, we had additional income of $647,000. At that time, we only had $144,000 in the operating bank account, which is less than 1/2 month's expense. We did not cover all of our operating expenses with our dues, so we had to take $334,000 of that $647,000 to cover the gap. Then we had to pay out the deferred comp obligations. And our accounts payable was $75,000, which we're always going to have an accounts payable at the end of the month. There was nothing left to go in the reserves in 2021. At the end of 2021, our reserves balance was $1 million. In 2022, we had an additional income of $1,095,000. And because we were able to cover the operating expenses with our HOA dues, we have $466,000 sitting in the bank, which is a buffer to cover 1 month of our operating expenses. We covered our deferred comp. We were able to pay back the $160,000 from the capital reserves that was borrowed in March of 21. We were able to cover $120,000 in capitalized items such as fryers for the kitchen, HVAC unit for the sun porch, HVAC unit for the admin office, and other items such as that. We were able to pay our accounts payable of $48,000, which left us $210,000 to deposit to the reserves, which brought us up to $1,400,000 in the reserves. So if you look at our 5-year capital plan, you'll see the large difference between the $1.4 million in reserves and the number we're trying to get to. And that's why it's important to build the reserves. If we look at option 1 and do nothing, sure, it increases our capital reserves to $1.7 million, but the bottom line is 22% less than the recommended option. Again, look at the 5-year capital plan and the number in which we would need to get to. Moving to page 7, which is the final board recommendation. The recommendation being made to the association, which is illustrated as option 3, is a 5.5% increase. This recommendation allows us to cover the operating cost with HOA dues. It allows us to deposit $124,000 into the reserves from our HOA dues, which is half the committed reserve amount of $240,000. Have a 1-month buffer in the bank of $425,000. Pay our deferred comp obligation, and pay our accounts payable that we'll always have at the end of the month. It then allows us to make an extra deposit into the reserves in the amount of $531,000. For all the words I've just said, to me the beauty is looking at the bottom line of the reserves count. $1 million in 2021, $1.4 million in 2022, and what could be $2 million in 2023. That will mean that we will have doubled our reserves in 2 years from the year 2021 to 2023. You can think about that, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian to go over the capital consideration plan.
Okay, you know what, I think I need that, my phone is off. That's better, right?
Yep.
Right, because I'm gonna go up and I'm gonna talk about here. And Clay, could you just go back to that last slide for a second? Okay, so everybody can hear me, sure, right? Okay, so what I wanna point out is, here's what the board has approved, right? $2 million in the reserve. The reserve doesn't belong to the board. Okay, it belongs to you guys. All that money in the bank is yours. Okay, it's not mine, it's yours. Okay? But likewise, you have a bill coming. That bill is $5 million. All right? Because we live here. We have a 36-year-old building. Okay? We have to fix it. And we have to do the things that are necessary to do. So these aren't random numbers. They may be rounded numbers. They may be approximate numbers. But we've taken bids on Chase. We've taken bids on generators, and we know what it's gonna cost, or we at least have bids for sealing and caulking the building. Right, so these are not random numbers. They're approximate numbers, and they're rounded for the benefit of not having a 617 at the end. Okay, but this is what we believe over the next 5 years we're gonna spend to get to the building of things like Chase, right? We talked about that. Sealing and caulking so that we don't have water damage. We know the HVAC units on the top of the roof. We know that they need to be repaired and replaced, all right? And you have all these things. I know that there are people on the 3rd and 6th floor who want their floor renovated, okay? It's not unknown to the board. But we know when we did the last 2 floors, it was $350,000. We know that for a fact, okay? So now go to the slide. Because I'm just putting in perspective what gets in the reserve versus what we actually are working with. So we don't have enough money in the reserve to cover those costs. Over time, we would get there, right? Because if you look at how much we've accelerated the reserves, you can see that we can get to the numbers we need to get to. We just haven't focused on it in history. We are focusing on it for the last couple of years. It's been a planning process to get here, okay? But just to look at a couple of things, we're going to put in front of you, and Scott's going to talk about the initiation fee. It's a way to, it's something that's common in real estate here, in terms of these types of facilities. Well, we want to get that too, because we know it generates money for our capital reserve, okay? We want to, we have a small need to increase the price of meals. Okay, hey, look, I know, $7.50 is great, $8.50 is good, $9.50 for dinner. I can't go to Chick-fil-A and get it. Okay, so it as a modest increase, $1 on breakfast, $1 on lunch, $1.50 on dinner. In brunch, we want to increase, but we want to make brunch better. Right, we want to make brunch more robust. And we're going to start to do that now, as opposed to, we're going to let you see it first before we actually come to that increase in the brunch. We're going to make it worth it, okay? And so, when you look at those types of changes, you can see how it gets money into other income or capital reserve. Lastly, there's a ROI, there's a return on any investment that we do, right? So if I fix something so that it doesn't break, I don't have to spend that money. So when your ROI is good, when your return on investment is good, you can benefit from that. And while these aren't the most spectacular numbers, I just wanted to point out this water mitigation issue. Okay, water mitigation, in the last basically 3 years, insurance paid out claims of $106,000 on them. Mount Vernon Towers carried the bill for $230,000. Okay? Our insurance premiums went up by $110,000. So the cost of water problems was $400,000, over $100,000 a year for water. That's all we're talking about. Okay? So if we do things like sealing and caulking the building envelope, right, it may cost us $600,000, but over the years, that will return our investment. Okay? So that's why these things are pointed out here. But let's talk about capital for a second, because there's also confusion about capital. What does the board get to do? What doesn't the board get to do? All right, what's in a capital plan? What I know is what I showed you on the last page was all the different things that we know about. What's on this page are probably the most immediate things that we have to deal with, right? We've been talking about the chases for 1.5 years. All right, sealing and caulking the building, we know we've got to do that. We know that we have to replace and repair, that this is the year that we're gonna have to do the air conditioners. I saw you shake your head on floor 3 and 6, right? We have to get to floor 3 and 6. You know the sad thing? I'll just make a point about the sad thing about floor 3 and 6, okay? Is that because we didn't have money in our reserve, okay? Because of the way we were financing ourselves, our operation, you know why 3 and 6 aren't done? Because you lost in a pick from the hat, right? We picked from a hat. How sad is that?
When are you gonna make it up to us?
Okay. But that's what happened. Okay, you got the short straw. But no, we don't want that. Okay, we're trying to get to the place that we need to be in order for that not to ever be the case. So just in doing that, we know we have 2 million, or I'm sorry, if we approve the budget, we expect to have 2 million by the end of the year. By the end of next year, by the end of this year, we'll have 1.4 million. Okay? So here's why I'm not asking anybody to vote on a capital plan right now. We're gonna have a special meeting about the capital plan, because we can vote right now, okay? And if we vote right now, I'm gonna ask you to cough up a check for $16,672, okay? Because $16,672 times 299 units gets us our money, okay? I can take $1 million out of the capital reserve, and we can bring that price down to 13,000. Anybody want to write a check for 13,000? No. Okay? So we have got some work to do. What we want to do, what we need to do, all right, is we need to know what our budget is. We need to know whether or not we're going to get additional income from a declaration on initiation fees. All right? Once we do this, we've already done some, what I would consider to be schedules of, depending on how much we have, how much we get, we can watch the assessment, what would be a special assessment, sort of go away over time, get smaller, because at the end of the day, the way we're operating the business is to create that funding for the capital reserve so that we can pay for these things. And we'll catch up, right? Because if you look at those numbers, if you think about doubling the capital reserve because of what we did so far, 3 years, there's another 500,000, 4 years, another 500,000. I think, actually go back to the slide 9, Clay, if you would. No, go back to slide 8. Right? What you can see is we're throwing off about $500,000 into the reserve based on that budget. Okay, I don't have to do that again to get that number, to get that 500,000. I don't have to do it again, I don't have to repeat it. The only thing that I wanna do here, going forward, is just try to keep up with the CPI, whatever that's gonna be, right? Whatever the cost is gonna be. All right, so we know that we can create $500,000 in reserve every single year that can go towards paying down any debt we have. Go back to that slide again. The important thing is that the issue that we really face here is not whether or not we can afford that. We can afford that over a period of time. But what we don't have is we don't have the money in the bank account to pay for it. Right? So, okay, so where are we gonna get that from? Dave, you wanna write a check for $3 million?
Not right now.
You wanna secure a loan for $3 million?
Not right now.
Okay. So we're gonna figure out ways to make that work, all right? But again, it can't happen until I know what we're dealing with. Okay? And I think this board knows how to do it. I think this board knows what they're doing. Okay? But we're not there. We wanna look at it, finalize alternatives, right, for us to be able to vote on. And then we will vote on it, all right, based on the projects that we can approve, because let's just look at these for a second. These are not all voting items, okay? There's a difference between a capital expense, something that you buy, that you get to expense over time because it lasts for a long time, and a capital improvement. Capital improvement is I'm going to do something to change something that makes our building better for whatever reason. And capital improvements, we vote on. Capital expenditures, we don't necessarily vote on, okay? Because if the HVAC units on the rooftop on July 6th of 2023 fail, do you think that the board has to convene a special meeting to vote to give you air conditioning within the week? Or does the board have to wait for you guys to vote as to whether or not you want air conditioning? And so that's a simple capital expenditure that we are authorized to do. It's an emergency, we gotta fix it. We'll take it from the reserve to do that, okay? But what we have to do here is we have to be clear before we can present something to you. What are the capital expenditures versus what are the capital improvements? So we need help, all right, determining what is what so that we can put the right things in front of the folks to vote in a special meeting. And that's what we'll do. Okay, so it's not just as simple as, oh, gee, look, here's a number, and oh, gee, look, here's a cost. Because we're gonna have to go to the market in some way and figure out how to get the upfront money to deliver the improvements and the expenditures that we need to deliver. It's as simple as that, okay? So, I'm sure there's probably a lot of questions that are out about that. But I'm gonna leave it like that for now until we get to the end, and I'm gonna turn it over to Scott so he can talk more about in detail about this, what this is and why this is. Okay? All good?
actually gonna talk,
You need this one?
no, I got my own. Actually gonna talk about the bylaws, and then Scott's gonna talk about declaration. Okay, so a little background on this subject. The bylaws state that the non-resident board members are entitled to a payment each month in which the owner residents are to vote on the amount in which they receive. That happens to be currently $400 a month and has been the same amount since 2014. The non-resident board members receive a 1099 and have every year, unless they received a credit against their bill, and as of 2021, they now also receive a 1099 for amount that they're being paid for. The practice that started some time ago by a board unknown, because I could not find any votes in the minutes, was that the owner residents received a credit for their meals, TV service, and telephone service on their monthly bill. Now, in the income statement, you can see under the professional fees board of directors, that's where you see the outside board members' expense show up. The credit that the owner residents were receiving, the meals, TV service, and telephone service, was going against the revenue. It's just decreasing, so it's already in the income statement. So fast forward to November 2022. As we didn't plan to have a bylaw change, but in one of the recent Meet the Candidate meetings, it was brought to our attention that a practice that had been occurring for 15 years and probably longer concerning the owner-resident board members was possibly not validated. I personally am the one that heard this statement, so I immediately started to dig into it. I went through amendments, previous minutes, previous owner-resident board statements as far back as our accounting system would allow. And then I finally turned to our HOA attorney for counsel for clarification. Our HOA attorney stated that we did need a bylaw change in order for this practice to continue. And so that's what brings us to having the bylaw amendment that you have received. We thought it fair that all the board members receive the same amount per month. However, the owner residents cannot receive cash, so they would receive their form of payment as a credit to their bill, and likewise with the outside owners, they will also receive a 1099. You can read through the bylaw amendment. Everybody has their own opinions, but at the end of the day, the board works hard for the community. And I'm going to address a question why I'm standing here, because there was a question I saw come through earlier as who went through this, why it wasn't talked about in previous board meetings, is because this just came up in November. So our HOA attorney said you can't just throw a bylaw amendment out there at any time during the year. You've got to present it at the annual meeting. You can't call a special meeting for a bylaw amendment. So that is why it was sudden, and it's up to you to vote. And now I'll turn it over to Scott to talk about the declaration consent change.
Sorry, I was out of order.
Okay, what we got up here? All right, the board has, you see this up here, and actually the idea of a buy-in, if you will, is very, very common amongst condominium units. The fact that it occurs is designed to increase the revenue that goes into the reserve fund. And of course, we've heard a lot about reserve fund this afternoon, and we know that we need to increase it to cover the expenses that we know are coming. So this was another technique to buy into the reserve fund. If we had this in place during this year, we would have added to the reserve fund an additional $109,000 $535. That represents 2% on the sale units of the various condos. If we break it down, we have four studios that sold, and they averaged $85,350 each. 2% on that was $1,707. So that's what would have been additional on that purchase at closing. 18 one-bedrooms sold for an average of $157,528. That would have been an additional $3,150.56 that would have been applied at closing to each one of those units. 9 two-bedrooms, they sold on an average of $255,544. Each one of those units, 2%, would have been $5,110.88. So we overall would have added basically $110,000 to our revenue. Now, people buy here at Mount Vernon to live here. They come to rent here. They want to live here. We don't normally think about this place as a place where we're trying to make an investment and get a return. We're trying to buy in here and live here, whether you're renting or whether you're buying. If you go to a apartment style complex like Lynbrook or one of the others that are owned by a large company, you will pay up front a fee, a large fee, and you will get maybe a 90% return on it, depending upon what particular what particular program you took. You may get a 50% return on that, and I'm talking about return of the original money, not a profit of 50%. You will get lucky if you get half your money back on some of these places, maybe 90% back. So here, we're taking a very small percent, 2%, adding it to the reserves, and that way, that kind of comes up to what you as owners have already paid in. Because right now, we have $1.4 million, and if you divide that $1.4 million out, you come up with this million, with this, what is it, I forgot offhand already. $4,800. That $4,800, each one of you already has, on an average, the 2 bedrooms have a little more than the studios, okay? That's the way it works. But $4,800, each one of us has already paid into that reserve, already has a claim on it. So the new people coming in then are gonna put in 2% of what their purchase price is. So this is a good way to increase the reserves on a one-time basis and still get us to do some of the capital improvements we need to make. So we'll answer questions on that later, I'm sure. Okay.
In closing, just to go over what the board recommendations are one more time, is one, to approve the 5.5% HOA due increase. As I have stated, that will allow us to cover the operational expenses and half of our reserve commitment, as well as allow us to double our capital reserve from 2021. Consent to the one-time initiation fee that Scott just discussed, which is 2% of the gross sales or tax assessed value. Those funds will deposit directly into the capital reserve account. And also a reminder for the third statement that a special meeting will be called in the first quarter of 2023 to vote on the 5-year capital funding. That is not part of the voting at the annual meeting. Important dates and information to remember. The annual meeting will be December 12th at 7 p.m. with check-in beginning at 6 p.m. in the back lobby. If you designate your proxy to someone, they must be present at the annual meeting in order for it to count. If you turn in a proxy and you show up at the annual meeting, your proxy will be thrown out and you will be given a ballot. Also, as a reminder, if your account is in arrears at the annual meeting, you will not be permitted to enter and cast a vote. That's all I have. I'll turn it over for any of the board business before we get into questions.
Okay, I think, I mean, is there any board business that we want? Is there any other? I'll call somebody else. That's probably somebody asked me to vote for somebody. Any other business for the board specifically that we want to go over? No? Okay, all right. So then let's just open it up for questions, right?
Do we want to cover the questions that we?
Yeah, I mean, let's read through some of the questions and we'll see what relevance they have to the budget package, and then we'll just open it up to the floor for additional questions. Let's start with this. Are there folks that have got questions that they are wanting to ask? Right, just show of hands. Okay, there's a few for sure. Okay, great. Okay, so why don't we go through some of the questions then? Let's see if we've already answered them.
Okay. Why were the important dates and times not followed regarding emailing the packet, at the minimum sending an owner email with the notification that it was mailed and that it would be posted on the owner's login on the website? I ask this because I did not receive anything until the 28th when I emailed it upon my request, when Rita emailed it upon my request, and did not receive the packet until late afternoon the 28th. With only several days to look at it. As a reminder, last year I received it November 2nd, 2021. So we emailed all the packets to the owners on 11/21 and delivered it to all the owner residents who live here. It was also placed on the website. The package was too large for emailing, which is why I took out all the candidate information part of the package and sent it to a couple owners who requested it. I think the suggestions of emailing the owners to let them know the packets had went out and was posted on the portal is a great suggestion for myself and administration for the future mailings. Any other comments? Okay. Regarding the master planning referred to under FY22 guiding principles and the $75,000 in the first year capital plan, what is this for? How much has already been in 2022, and who have you paid as consultants? This is a major expense and the owners need some accountability.
Okay, so you know what, that was up there on the slide and I didn't get to that. Well, let's go through the list. So let's talk about master planning for a second. Okay, this board, okay, and our finance team, right, are all very smart people. But we don't know everything, okay? And we've got some major expenditures that we think that we are gonna have to pay for. And before doing that, we thought that it was a good idea, the board unanimously thought that it was a good idea to get an architect in here. It was advised to us by the city as well, to get an architect in here, to start to look at what it was that we had to do from the facility standpoint. How do we deal with it with respect to the community? How do we deal with it with respect to, the surrounding areas? Because there are people that have a say that aren't just owners, right? They may not have a vote, but they may do things to prevent us from doing certain things that we want to do. We have to permit, we want to get our permits, we don't want to be delayed, blah, 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 blah. So hiring an architect to help us deliver a final, when I say final, a first time real master plan for the facility that looks at the site, looks at anything from buildable space to change space to the easements, the regulations. We thought was a very good idea. They also can help us to do sourcing. They can help us to find financing. And so we hired after seeing 3 different architectural companies, we hired one called Cooper Carey, which is a very significant architectural firm to help us with the first 2 phases of the master plan, which is sort of scoping and the facility review, and then to visualize the land, the lot, and to show some ideas about what we could do with the space, right? What maybe pictures of new chases, whether they're aluminums, recommend materials to us. So we thought that it was a very good idea to do that. I think the cost of what we approved was a total of 30, how much, Scott?
About 22.
About 22,000. So that's what we approved. There's another part to that, which we haven't approved yet, which goes beyond that piece of it, which goes to documentation, permitting, all the things that we did. What the board approved was something that was a capital investment, which was less than we have to, less than we have the authority to spend, but the total bill for that could be about $48,000. That's what they've estimated to us. However, again, we've approved only $22,000. We want to see what we get. We expect to have some good information that comes out of that that will be very helpful and very worthwhile. As far as the capital investment goes, that's in the 23 plan, we haven't agreed to any of that. However, knowing that this could be a longer process, it could be a more involved process as we get to those steps, we wanted to make sure that in the capital plan that we had money set aside in order to continue with a professional to help us with that if we needed to do that. But again, that is actually a capital investment that actually will wind up being approved by the owners in a special meeting, but obviously what we would have is something for you to see of work that they would do so that you can make an informed decision about that. So that's how I would categorize the capital, the master plan. It's a plan for our building that will take us the next 36 years.
Okay. If you are paying consultants, architect, design, etc., why not pay a management consulting group to evaluate how MPT expenses / budget compare to similar facilities and ways to trim expenses?
Okay. I guess I'll take that as well. Well, we've talked about management consulting, right? Whether or not we should do that, whether or not we'll get a bang for a buck out of that. I think that with all the things, the first thing that I would say is there are people on this board and people who volunteer that are somewhat skilled in it, and we've shown that we can trim costs. If you look at the cost from 21 to 22, we actually reduced cost where we've been in an inflationary environment, significant inflationary environment, where we're expecting a 3% increase in cost next year. So I think we've had a good effort, good understanding. I wish Bill Lane were here, right? Because he was also very good at it. But he's not. And but I would say that while it's an idea that's always out there, it is not, of all the things that we're doing, we can find the low-hanging fruit, we can trim the costs, we know how to do it, and at some point, when it gets really difficult and we run out of things that we could do, then it makes sense maybe to bring somebody else in that can actually help us to see more. And so it's a good suggestion, but it's not to me, it's not the right time for that.
Let me add to that a little bit. The accountant at year end comes through and reviews our budgets, and they have frequently made suggestions to us on how we might improve our
It's true too.
expenses and improve our management of the funds. So
Yeah.
we get a little bit of that with the standard year to year.
Yeah, thank you for adding that.
In the FY23 assumptions, how can you assume that labor, food, maintenance, and unplanned will be lowered or go to zero when inflation has been driving these items up, not down? I feel like I covered that in the presentation. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Since you assume over $2 million for chase replacement and $600,000 for building ceiling, but have not presented information regarding bids, types of repairs, etc., and alternatives, I feel the entire capital plan is flawed. So what is the purpose of even including what may be an unnecessary and confusing section in the budget presentation? Think we
Well, I guess because it's about capital again, I'll take it. I'll make a statement which is, okay, nobody's perfect, maybe there's some flaws in it. But in general, it's a good plan, it's an appreciative plan of what we have to go through. And it's relevant to what you folks are gonna have to deal with as owners. Okay, so, I think that perhaps after we get through the rest of these questions, if that's still a question about it after what we've seen so far, then let's have that evolve a little bit more, because I'm not exactly sure how that question, relates to what we've seen so far, so.
I'd like to speak to that also. If we are doing a 5-year plan, which we've never had before here, to my knowledge, at Mount Vernon Towers, we had to look at all of the possibilities that we're facing. And this board has made the determination that we're not going to sugarcoat anything. We're going to tell you where we stand. And there's certain things we absolutely need to have done at different times in the very near future. We'll resolve those and push them back or forward as we have to, that we can afford to. But this chase repair and this elimination of water seeping through the brick is an absolute necessity. So there's no reason for us to put it off or not put it in the budget unless you know about it for this coming year and the next 5 years. We're now looking 5 years forward. That's what we're looking at. And we're going to try to manage everything as well as we can for that period of time. That's the reason that we added these costs in. And they look high to us too, by the way. Anything you pay, we have to pay. So therefore, we're not trying to get money spent for any reason that's absolutely not necessary. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Regarding the initiation fee, what is presented is misleading and not an honest depiction of the situation. Since all units have paid the same HOA with no assessments since 1968, all units have paid an equal amount into the reserve fund. How do you justify an initiation fee, which you state will ensure new purchasers contribute to current capital improvements, when there is not any difference between new and old owners / unit contributions, and therefore is very discriminatory against anyone who sells or buys a unit, which will be all of us at one time or another, unless we use the loophole you inserted regarding family. It's hard to read.
Well, first let me say that the HOA fee has not been the same over the past. It's always been varied by size of unit. What we had to do a couple of years ago was to adjust the way we were doing that, because we were not following the way the documents spell it out. And so now it is based upon the documents, and there are different fees for different size units. There always have been, but now that we're following the formula as presented in the documents. Regarding the loophole, it's really not a loophole. It's designed there so that if you were to take your assets and you wanted to take them from your personal name and put them into a living trust of some kind, you can do that without paying the additional fee. If the unit is owned by you and you want to pass it to your grandchildren, you can do that without paying the additional fee. But if the unit winds up going to another party, no matter who it is, as long as it's not an immediate family member or it's something that you personally own, such as a corporation or a trust fund, then it would incur that fee. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I add something to that. For you, those of you that have been here for a year, or 3, or 5, or 7, or 9, you have a investment in our reserve fund of roughly $4,800 per unit. Now, it doesn't seem fair to me that someone could come in and not pay some type of initiation fee toward that investment. We're talking about 2% of $100,000, they pay $2,000, or if it's $150,000, they pay $3,000. We've all paid into it. The value is here. You can't go anywhere in Atlanta, Georgia and buy a nicer home than we have here for the prices that you've paid and that we've paid. And so if someone come here and looks at a unit and it's priced at $175,000 and they're told they have to pay an initiation fee, it's just added to the top of the price. If they don't want to live here, let them go somewhere and pay $500,000 or something, because that's what our competition's getting. So we think it's very fair for those that have been here for years and years, paying into the project, into the homes we have here, and that others that come in to take advantage of it, whether they're gonna live here 2 years or whether they're gonna take it and flip it after a year or two, they should pay something into the reserve fee. That's my comment.
Why is there no against section on the proposed initiation form to change the bylaws? Do you plan on pushing this agenda to anyone who doesn't agree? Why is there no explanation of this, which is confusing and misleading? On the proxy form that you received in the packet, as will be on the ballot, there is a for, an against, and abstain for the bylaw. The bylaw change page was also in the packet that explains the current bylaw change, and I've also went over it. What happens if we vote yes to the HOA budget? Will this give the board the power to implement all the line items in the budget, including pushing the initiation fee and the capital improvement plan? On the proxy and the ballot that you'll have to vote on, the budget is a standalone. The bylaws are a standalone. If you vote yes for one and no for the other, it has nothing to do with each other. The initiation fee is a declaration consent. That is also completely separate. You have to sign the consent form if you choose to do so for the initiation fee. Also, nothing on the capital is being voted on at the annual meeting in 2022. What happens if we vote no to the HOA increase? Will this prevent the proposed budget and all of its confusing items to be postponed? What timeline is in place to explain other options to what the current board wants to accomplish with the capital fund and initiation fee? You kind of touched on that when you first started.
Yeah, I feel like we went through that.
Okay. All right. Moving on. Morrison's. In March 2022, there was a $122,000 disputed amount of payment to Morrison's. This was the amount above the contracted amount. What was the resolution? Did the board pay Morrison's, or was the amount added to this year's contract?
I've been asked to respond to that, and excuse me, the Morrison's people reduced their bill to us by $23,000. So out of the 122, we paid 99. And it was not added to this year's budget, but it was in this year's expenses because it was paid with this year's, during this year's time period, so.
In 2.2, Section A, management fee and other charges is allowed by contract to raise their management fee by 3%. Has this been done? Is Mount Vernon Towers paying more than the 3% increase?
The 3% increase was based upon what they wanted to do, and yes, we're paying that 3% increase. But in reality, it's a cost plus contract. So whatever the cost is, we pay. And the 3% applies to their management fees, which are a stated amount. So yes, we're paying.
Please read Article 2.2, Section B to the audience. Nothing contained in this agreement will be constructed as a representation or guarantee by Morrison that any financial, budgetary, performance, or other goals will be met, with the exception of the restrictions in 2.2, Section C, and the resident satisfaction performance plan described in paragraph 2.8 below.
Hey, Scott, I'm just gonna start by saying, I'm not sure what this all has to do with the budget. Right, I mean, we know what the costs are, right? If somebody wants to grind over this issue, which we know is more than the contract, okay? And we know it's a cost plus contract, and we have forecasted what the costs are going to be. Why are we rehashing this at this point? What we're trying to do is solve for the problem that we have. So, I'd comment on
So
that.
we'll move on that.
What's that?
We just move on and go to the next category.
Okay. Change in bylaws for compensation of board members. Who wrote this request? Well, I stated earlier the background on it, and after research, I contacted our HOA attorney and requested his counsel on it and asked him to write the bylaw up. And it wasn't proposed or discussed in the board meetings because it just happened in November of 2022. Why was the $400 figure mentioned if it hadn't been written that the compensation for non-resident and resident board members would be equal with the resident directors given credit against their HOA invoice? No subsequent vote of the members of the association would not be necessary. I don't know, but all I know is Randy said that an amount had to be notated in there because other board members, the outside board members couldn't vote on the inside board members because the inside board members had the authority already to vote on the outside board members.
So it's you
It's
guys.
across
You guys
the
just
board.
vote.
Right.
All right, it's a $400 credit for the resident owners. You guys just vote. It's okay or it's not okay to you. It's too hard for us to do that. It's Scott and I, there's no other person that would, and my belief is that this is a hard job and folks don't make it easy for us, so.
And the owner residents have not voted on the amount in which the outside directors received since 2014. That's why it's still the same. Our former unplanned extraordinary expenses now considered repairs expense. I covered that already. Our bylaws state that it shall be the duty of the board to prepare a budget covering the estimated cost of operating the condominium during the coming year. Capital improvements and a reasonable reserve for operating funds, repairs, contingencies, capital expenditures. There is no provision in the bylaws that the board may delay or postpone providing the capital expenditures in the budget as noted in section 4.04. However, since the annual meeting last December in 2021, and according to the information provided in the annual budget package for 2023, the board will not meet the requirement again. The 2022 capital budget was promised for a year and never materialized. Please explain why the board believes they cannot meet this requirement as outlined for a second year in a row.
Well, we're gonna meet the requirement.
We just gotta answer
Yeah, I mean,
I can go through a whole bunch of reasons why we didn't get a plan approved in FY '22. It can start with the number of items that we were looking at, the number of bids that we asked people to do between the colors, Balfour, Parker Young, the way the contracts, the way they wanted to do the design were, and there was the fourth one, which is, I can't remember the name of it, I can never remember the name of them.
CCS?
Yeah, CCS. And so all of the designs were different, all of the approaches were different, the materials were different. We couldn't get to a place where the bids were the same. And so we had a committee to come together, and the committee never made a recommendation on what to do because of the same reasons. The outcome of it was that Scott did a great job of creating a bidding contract that would put all the vendors in the same plane so that we could actually have an intelligent conversation about it. And so all those things over time prevented us from having something really square and hard to get this thing started with. And we know that that's the biggest single expense that we have. And so that's the primer for everything else. And so it didn't happen. But we understand that we got some different rules going on. We now understand what our budget is. We now know what we're throwing off for capital. We're waiting for the budget to be approved. We want the budget to be approved. We want the declaration to be approved. We want to know that we're all happy with what we've got in front of us so that we can actually get to getting these things done because they need to be done. They need to be, some of them will need to be approved. So.
The board suggests that MBT will borrow funds for undisclosed projects. What would be borrowed and why? What is collateral for these supposed funds? MBT Condo Association doesn't own anything. What about owners with mortgages and which prohibit liens?
Wait a second, is that the,
Question.
that's a question, and it's about the funding? The board suggests that MVT will borrow, is that the one that you just read?
Yes.
Will borrow funds for undisclosed projects. What didn't we disclose? That's gonna be my first question. I don't know what that means. Who said we were borrowing anything? What I alluded to is the fact that we don't have upfront costs. So we don't have upfront money to actually pay for things. So we're gonna have to find a vehicle, whether that's Dave giving us the $3 million, which he might wanna do, reconsider, or whether or not it's going to a bank. Those things depend on how much money we have in the capital reserve, all right? Because that capital reserve is if nothing else to spend, it's collateral to borrow, okay? Let's say we want to take a piece of property and put it as collateral, okay? For a bank to come and give us a secured loan, which might be a low amount, which might be a low interest rate. We need to consider that. But again, those things have to be brought to you guys as opposed to us deciding them. And I'm just gonna sort of go back to, on that list is everything we know about. Where there's no hidden agenda up there, there's no hidden items, I don't know what to say about it. There's nothing hidden.
Is any board member or their families employed by, on the board of, or part owner of any real estate / property development company? If so, what is the name of the company and its principals?
Does this have to do with the budget? Somebody wants to bring that up at a board meeting, bring it up at a board meeting. I'm not. It's not a budget item.
Okay?
By the way, I'll answer the question, which is not me, okay? So I'll start with that, but it's not a budget question. So that's what this is about.
I think a number of us are thinking the same thing. We shouldn't be asking any questions that aren't pertaining to budget. Even though they sent them in, there'll be another board meeting.
Yeah,
They can be handled at that time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Skip over.
Okay. The next question is the same then, family employed by the board, part owner, real property management. The next one, what compensation of each of the current board members received during their entire term in office? How is the compensation listed on the budget? Are they provided 1099? I answered that. I can't say if they reported on their tax returns or not. The The contract was proposed / signed between the MVT board and the architectural service company. What was the contract for? How much has been paid and what deliverables have been and to be provided to the MVT board. A contract.
Yeah, we answered that. We got right down to the dollars.
There was much debate over how to proceed with preparing the chases. It seems that there is evidence to suggest that a whole-scale replacement is not needed and that the board is using this opportunity to change the outside appearance of the building in direct contradiction with what owners don't want. When will the board represent residents with at least 2 different options for the chase repair for our approval? In the first quarter of 2023. Please will you provide a breakout of the budget amounts for Morrison's food, temporary labor?
Wait a second. We're going back to that one. There is much debate over how to proceed with repairing the chases. Is that the question? All right.
I think the question is, when will the board present residents with at least 2 different options for the chase repair for our approval?
That'll be in the first
First
quarter.
quarter of 2023. Please will you provide the breakout, the budgeted amounts for Morrison's food, temporary labor, and any other line items that have costed the association with the Morrison's contract for both contract year ending 2022 and 2023. It does not appear that the upper limits for the Morrison's contract were budgeted for 2023 and may not include the additional 3% increase. In 2021, Morrison's exceeded its upper limit. Conservative budget is warranted in this case. We actually budgeted more than the upper limit to be more realistic of what we feel the budget actually is, which is built on the run rate and the forecast and not the contract itself. For the budget expense categories below, please explain the difference between the 2022 and 2023. I went over contract labor, license taxes and fees, professional fees, other, which is I went over that with the consultants for internet, marketing, so forth, repairs expense, activities expense, I didn't go over, but I think the difference was about $3,000 there. Given the last year's year-end survey indicated the residents prefer MVT as it is, no new buildings, no more parking spaces. Why would the board insist on residents voting for next year's capital budget plan as one item as opposed to piecemeal, pieces over 50,000, unless the board were afraid that residents would vote no to 1 or more capital expenditures of the capital plan?
Yeah, I'll take that one because we now know the answer, right? We didn't know the answer. We presented it as sort of a big number that everybody had to look at. So the 2 things that we have to do first is determine what are votable items. And then when we determine what those items that we have to vote on, which are the capital improvements, then each of those items will be voted on individually. There won't be a package. If we put together a package, then it'd be 2 votes. It'd be, you gotta vote on the package first, and then you gotta vote on the individual items, or not. So why not just vote on the individual items? So that's the way we'll do it.
Okay, that's all the questions I had.
Yeah.
And Susan's got the microphone.
Yeah, so the acoustic, I know that the acoustics in here are really hard, right? I'd like to make a capital improvement. Right, the acoustics. But I would just ask that you speak into the microphone so that same as you hearing us, we can hear you.
You quickly referred to labor in the dining room, something about contract labor versus temporary help, permanent. Now, how many of the dining room employees belong to us and how many to Morrison's and how many are temporary?
Currently, we have 21 staff members that are either full-time or part-time in the dining room and kitchen that belong to Morrison's. The only time right now that we're having to utilize temporary service is if we have call-outs and weekends, and which we're still working on. We're looking to hire 1 more in the kitchen and 2 to 3 more part-time in the dining room.
So none belong to us.
Well, they will never belong to us. They will belong to Morrison's as an employee. But we're one community, so essentially every employee that is hired on full-time all belongs to us.
We've spent about,
I think,
in hearing,
No.
Hold it up, Dan.
we've spent about 2 hours or so, and about half of the audience is left. And the focus of the presentation has been on what is presented as has to be done and how we can generate the money to do it. There are many of us that believe that some of these items don't have to be done, or to the expense that's allocated. The chases, for example, where I spent dozens of hours on this committee and do not see any need from an engineering standpoint, which I am one, to spend $2.1 million to replace the chases in total. The question is, when and how do people that have an opposing view to what's been presented tonight get to share it with the voters?
Dan, I think that will occur once we get bids back from the variety of people we're talking with. And we can then sit down and analyze those bids and analyze what they say about the condition of the chases. And we can all then come to an agreement on what we're gonna do, A, B, C, or nothing.
Contractors asked to bid on a job will never say it doesn't need to be done, because they're interested in doing work. So I reject that aspect of it. And furthermore, when it comes to these costs that add up to the $5 million, there are many on there that other people have proposed alternates that wouldn't cost that much. Last year, we had a meeting similar to this, and then there was a presentation recorded and put on the MVT TV channel or whatever it's called, which further endorsed what was presented here, and there was really no opposing views except whatever by word of mouth could be done. I would like to see that changed this year, that if this is the position of the board, that's fine. That's what you guys are asked to do. Doesn't mean that that's unanimous consent that should be ignored. There are many of us that have information that we would like to share, so it isn't just, this is $5 million we need to spend, and here's the additional way we're gonna raise money to accumulate it. One thing we didn't talk about at all tonight is how to reduce that $5 million. That's a more effective way of being able to pay for things, is making darn sure we need to do it and that we're not overspending for some of these things.
I think, Dan, once again, when we get around to putting up the true cost for each one of these, since it's been bid out, that we will have that discussion of should we or shouldn't we, and what's the value of doing it.
The next issue I want to address is this architect. 3 of you up there have made it very public that you would like to see additional towers that contains things like another dining room, a quote 80-seat posh theater, and other facilities on this site. I read the architect's contract this afternoon, and it starts out as chase evaluation, but before long it gets into floor plans, exterior views, or exterior surfaces, hiring consultants when it comes to dining and other things. So the question for the board is this architect also going to be developing plans for expansion of Mount Vernon Towers in facilities? Not repairing, not giving us advice on what needs to be done for what we have, but expansion. And laugh all you want, that's a very valid question.
Well, it's a good question. I don't think the Scott, you can disagree, you were in all the meetings, you were in all the meetings. Janice, you were in all the meetings. I don't think the architect cares. I don't think they have they don't have a dog in the hunt. What they want to do is sort of look at the building structure itself, want to visualize what we believe is we should have a building, 3, maybe 4 people, okay? You can say 3, but I don't necessarily agree that it's only 3.
I don't know about
Okay.
the fourth person, I know the
So-
three of you.
So that we should have a facility that is worthy of the space that we take, that serves our residents to the things that they want. And one of the things that what the architect wants to do is he wants to put together a committee of residents, okay, to help to visualize or talk about the things that we might want. You might say, I want a movie theater here. We don't have, where's the space for the movie theater? I don't know. You want a movie theater?
No, I don't.
I don't know,
No.
right? It's a rhetorical question, okay? But those are the questions that we have to have a group of residents, a group of people to talk about what they want. And we need to look at the future for the building, because otherwise, we might not be attracting the right thing. We know that today that we have a building that people have been complaining now for a while about our internet service. Okay? Our internet service sucks, right? Okay. Hey, Michael, let me ask you a question. You've been involved in building a lot of the facility, doing maintenance on the facility. We have how thick are the walls between the hallway to a unit?
6, 8 inches.
16 inches. What's in those walls?
6 to 8.
What's that? 6 to 8 inches, okay. What's in those walls?
It depends. There's some, every 2 or 3 units, there's concrete walls between them. Some are just studs in between 2 or 3 units.
So stuff, right? Could you have some rebar in there? You could have some concrete in there,
Yeah.
right? You could have some pipes and wires,
Oh, absolutely.
right? Yeah. So when you're streaming on internet, you gotta get outside your door into the hallway to get an access point where you can actually drive it into the network. You think that's easy, or you think that's hard? You think that quality is good or bad?
I mean, you could have feeders in the hallways, points all the way down the hallway and have them connected to the individual units.
Yeah, I'm talking about a wireless signal from inside to outside, getting through those concrete walls,
It depends on where you space it going down the hallway.
okay? Does it depend on the equipment that you have to do it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard, okay, it's not that easy. We have a 1986 building, 1986?
Yes.
Okay, it's a 1986 building,
That's an
okay?
issue.
And we're living in 2020, about to be 2023. So,
I'd like to readdress that. At one point in the beginning, when I came here, I interviewed the vice president.
well, look, I just, okay.
There are many options.
My point is that this is not about expansion. We don't know anything like that at this point. Oh yeah, can we talk about it and say, wouldn't this be cool? Wouldn't this be great? I'd love to see this, I'd love to see that. It's my opinion, it's just one opinion, okay? But when you do those things, it's the owners that have to vote on it. It's not my building, it's not Scott's building, it's not your building, it's our building, okay? And that's what we have to do in order to make changes to it.
I think we want to move on.
Okay.
Real quick, is it on? Real quick for you, when I came here many years ago, I interviewed the vice president of Comcast. Comcast agreed to come into our building and do the whole building over with no cost to Mount Vernon Towers, not 1 cent. And run wiring, internet, cable, TV, whatever the whole, there are many different options. So I think, if you folks want to look into it,
That's fantastic, because
Yeah.
we actually have a meeting with them tomorrow.
My point isn't that we can't invest in order to improve where we are. We can invest to improve where we are. But where we are is where we are.
You had, Julie was first, I think, and then you've got Ann back there.
Yeah, I just, would like you to clarify, because it went through my head. Do non-resident board members get some kind of compensation now?
Yes.
Oh.
As I said, it goes back 15+ years. They get a credit to their monthly invoice for their meals.
No, I'm talking about non-resident.
Oh, non-resident, I'm sorry, yes. It's currently $400.
Okay, so I just wasn't clear about that.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Ann's
Dave,
next.
Dave's been.
Ann,
Yeah, and then Dave
Yeah,
Ward's
Dave's
had his
been-
hand up as well.
yeah, but he just put it back. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if it would be possible for the board to focus on repairs to the existing building, so that we can go ahead and stop the water damage now, instead of engaging an architectural firm to talk about what costs and things we might do in the
Yeah,
future.
like the water damage.
Yeah, she's asking,
Same thing for the chases, those things that we know need to be repaired now. I think return on investment would be much better for that, to stop deterioration of this whole building.
she's asking if the board could focus on items such as sealing the brick, caulking the windows in order to stop water intrusion, and focus on things like the chases.
Those are
That
our
we need to
immediate
know.
concerns. What was on the list was our immediate concerns. It didn't have anything to do with putting up another building.
So you're saying focus on the items that need repair, and
Yes, I'm just asking, if we need money so badly, can't we use the money that we have for these items that we know we need, rather than engaging an architect?
I don't miss anything.
No, and then you're right. If, in the, well, it's actually in the 5-year plan, those are the ones that we are looking at for 2023 immediately. Doing the ceiling of the building, the chases, because the chases that we know need to be repaired. We know that the balconies need to be repaired. So as we are looking at the immediate items that need to be repaired, those are the ones that will take our first priorities, right?
That's exactly right. There's no new buildings on that list.
Right. There's not a,
what she's saying is, why can't we go ahead and take care of those items rather than wait on an architect?
Well, the reason that the architect is important to us is because they not only will, sort of do this sort of visioning, but if you make decisions, and you're locked into those decisions, right? So you want to be careful about what decisions you make. The other thing is they also will help us to understand the materials that are going to be used, right? And whether we like it or not, even if we put the exact same material on the building, exact same material, you know what it's going to look like? It's going to look clean and neat, even if it's the same color, and it's going to look different. So it's going to make the balconies look terrible when we have those neat, clean chases, exactly the same color hue that they are today. And so we're going to see the water stains, the black water stains on the walls of the brick, okay? And so it's going to change the look of the building. So the question is, okay, well, what are we doing, right? Can we just pay the $2.1 million and just fix the chase? Fine, right? If that's what people want to do, but I think it goes beyond this board's capability to make really good decisions about that. Like I said, we're smart, but we don't know everything. Do you want to add, Scott?
Right to Dan, he's still standing.
no.
No, Dave's been out there with his hand up.
All right, can you hear me now today?
Yes.
All right, very good. After, I've got now 20 years of condo board experience, and after I retired, I went to work for Community Management Associates, the largest property management company in Georgia, for 15 years, mostly because of that background. So I asked them, I called them on two things that had come up today to see what they have to say about, number one, the buy-in. They have said that they go along with it. They have not had a problem with the buy-in if it's reasonable. And in our case, where our property values have gone up, but are still much lower than a lot of other properties, the 2% doesn't sound bad to them. And they say a lot of their properties do have the buy-in to build up reserves. The second thing surprised me. I asked them about the compensation for board members. I asked the president of CMA and the high-rise division manager. Both of them came back, and I've got it in writing, that no property management, no property that they manage, and they manage over 1,000 properties, has any compensated board members, refunding expense money that they might pay, but no compensation. Randy is the attorney for Mount Vernon Towers, is a very close friend and neighbor of Dennis Hoffman, who's the president of CMA. And it's interesting that Randy is approving this in the document. So I would say it'd be a good thing to contact Randy and tell him that CMA says that none of their properties have any compensation for board members, and how does that compare with what Randy's recommending? It puzzled me, but that's what I heard.
Your vote is no, that's fine.
That's right.
I out part back then.
Make sure you stay on the budget.
Regarding the 2%, Mount Vernon Towers is not on an island.
I can't hear you for the record.
Regarding the 2%, Mount Vernon Towers is not on an island. Our condos sell for what the market says they're worth. It's naive for us to sit here and say that we're the best little kept secret and that we are underpriced versus the competition. If that was the case, we would never have a condo that would be on the market for more than about 5 minutes. We are competitively priced. Smart people look around to see what they can get. I want to go back to the architect for a second. Somebody commented up there that it would be good for the architect to look at XYZ. I recommend the board look in the declarations at Article 9, first paragraph, which states in no uncertain terms that every owner, 100% of the owners, have to agree to any expansion, any tower, any posh movie theater, anything like that, that's made to this property, 100%. And if one person, which is me, and a lot of other people that have spoken to me about this, we do not approve of any expansion on this site.
Okay, well, we'll look into that, see if that's true.
It is true.
We'll look into it and see if it's true.
It is
Hello, not a complaint, just a question, thank you. So if I understand so far, in the first quarter, we're going to be voting on a capital plan. And as I understand, I think from Brian's explanation, the capital plan we're going to be voting on will include both capital expenditures and capital investments, even though capital expenditures don't need to be voted on by the membership because you have the authority, as they are important repairs, to just do them yourself without us voting on them. But nevertheless, I think you were saying you might give us the option to vote on maybe 2 chase options. If I understood that right, then that means that at least some portion of the capital plan we're voting on in the first quarter is going to be capital investment, which I take to mean it's going to be expansion as opposed to repairs. Is that a fair statement? And then the other half is, what's the difference between the capital plan or the 5-year plan that we're voting on in the first quarter and the master plan? Is there any difference? Because I think both of them have been mentioned in this meeting, and I'm clueless what the difference is between a master plan and our first quarter capital plan. Thank you.
I think I'll take the last question first, the difference between the master plan and the capital plan. The master plan is intended to help us look to the future and see what might need to be done, what's happening, right, and what might need to be done. That's the master plan. Part of that master plan is going to be what is immediate and what may be in the future, okay? So we're not really, there's no real vote on a master plan. There's a master plan that's done so that we can understand what things we have to consider in the future, okay? Like how to configure internet, let's just say, okay? So different things. What I said with respect to capital expenditures and capital investments is an important distinction between those two things. The difference between those two things is a capital expenditure is something that costs an X amount of dollars. Well, you know this, Stephen, right? That costs X amount of dollars, that has a useful life over time, that what you do is you capitalize that on your balance sheet, and then you expense it over time, okay? But it can be a repair. It can just be a simple repair, like a HVAC unit on the rooftop that needs to be replaced. Okay, that is not, it might cost $51,000 to do that. It doesn't require a vote from the owners in order to replace a necessary item because it's in disrepair, right? So, but if we'll go back to the infamous painting of the building, which was so 75% of the people we were told did not want to paint the building, that would be a capital improvement. If that were true, okay, that would be a capital improvement. So in order to do that, we want to change the face, the look of the building. And if we want to do that, we have to go to the owners. Unless it costs us $1 to do, we have to take that back to the owners. The owners have to vote on that. We're changing, right, the face of the building. We're changing what it is. We think we're improving it, but we're changing it. So that has to be voted on by the residents or by the owners. And so we would go and do that. What we need to do with our list of items that are on there, if you looked at page 9 and then page 11 in the deck, page 9 was bigger. The capital items were all the items that we identified, and page 11 was those things that we think are immediate, right? And so on page 11, and again on page 9, we have to determine what of those things are capitalized expenditures or capital expenses versus capital investments, which will change something. And it's hard to distinguish some of them, right, by looking at what they just say. We have to know which things are repairs and capitalized and which things are investments that are going to change the building in some fashion. So does that answer your question? What's that?
He said you gave him more credit than he deserves. He did not know the definition.
I'm sorry, I'm not.
You didn't know the definition? It's okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Pertaining to the budget?
Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Second, Scott? Everybody else? Aye? Aye? Okay, meeting is adjourned.